Your phone is ancient technology. The next computer isn't being built in a factory. It's being grown inside a petri dish filled with living human brain cells. What if the most powerful AI isn't digital, but biological? Growing in a lab, rewiring its own hardware with every new task, running on less power than a dim kitchen nightlight. Right now, in labs across Australia, the UK, and the US, scientists are training living human brain cells to run AI programs. This is not science fiction. This is biocomputing, and it's already here. Welcome to Captain Curious. Today, why the global tech industry is abandoning silicon to build computers made of flesh, neurons, and human DNA. To understand why this is happening, you need to know the wall digital AI just hit at full speed. ChatGPT and Midjourney have a dirty, expensive, and unsustainable secret. Training one cutting-edge AI model consumes more electricity than a small American town uses in a year. Every query you make burns hundreds of megawatt hours every single day. Silicon is burning through power grids, generating catastrophic heat, and running out of training data. The machine is eating itself. But nature solved all of these problems 300 million years ago. Your brain runs on just 20 watts, barely enough to dim a fridge bulb. Yet it composes symphonies, recognizes faces instantly, rewires itself overnight, and produces creativity no machine has replicated. So the most radical researchers ask the most dangerous question in modern science. Instead of building machines that imitate the brain, why not engineer and use the real biological thing directly? This led to the DishBrain, 800,000 living human cortical neurons fused to a digital microelectrode array, capable of learning new tasks in real time, with zero pre-programmed instructions. The very first task assigned to this living computer was a classic arcade game invented in 1972, one your grandparents would recognize immediately. Without eyes, ears, or any prior knowledge of physics, this cluster of human cells figured out how to track a moving object and return it with a virtual paddle, not programmed, just driven to avoid discomfort. The implications are so profound that Google DeepMind, DARPA, and Harvard are now racing to replicate it. Let's break down exactly how this wetware revolution is unfolding right now. Chapter 1: The Game in the Dish. In October 2022, a small Melbourne biotech startup published a paper in Nature Electronics, describing an experiment most scientists thought was decades away. They took adult human cells, reprogrammed them back to embryonic state, guided them to become cortical neurons over 14 days, then placed those living neurons onto a silicon microelectrode array. They called it the DishBrain. This wasn't a passive specimen. The electrode grid could read electrical signals from the neurons above and inject signals back in, a two-way digital biological communication channel. Scientists then connected the DishBrain to a live simulation of Pong, the 1972 Atari classic, where a paddle bounces a ball across a black screen without missing. But how do you communicate spatial information to brain cells with no eyes? You translate location into electrical language, precisely targeted electrode stimulation patterns. Left side electrodes encoded the ball's X, Y position as frequency patterns. Right side electrodes read the neural output to determine which direction the cells were moving the paddle. Initially, the cells fired completely at random, chaotic, uncoordinated bursts. The paddle missed every ball. The living tissue had no comprehension of the digital environment it had been dropped into. So researchers applied the free energy principle, Carl Friston's theory that biological systems are intrinsically motivated to minimize unpredictability in their sensory environment. Every time the paddle successfully deflected the ball, the system rewarded the neurons with structured, rhythmic electrical pulses, a calm, ordered sensation the cells found satisfying and sought to reproduce. But every missed ball triggered a violent burst of chaotic electrical static, high-entropy noise that created the biological equivalent of severe structural discomfort and disorientation. Within 5 minutes, the neurons began physically restructuring their synaptic connections. New dendritic branches grew. Existing pathways were pruned. The cells were literally rewiring their own hardware to escape the chaos. And they learned to play the game. Measurably faster than a standard digital reinforcement learning AI running on conventional silicon hardware under identical conditions. Biology beats silicon at its own game. Let that land. A disembodied cluster of human brain cells, sitting in suburban Melbourne, had never experienced existence, yet identified it was in a dynamic digital system and adapted to master it. Researchers called this organoid intelligence, noting the cells weren't just reacting, but demonstrating basic protosentience, adaptive awareness of their environment, and the consequences of their own behavior. The moment the paper published, the ecosystem erupted. Startups formed overnight across Silicon Valley, London, and Tokyo. Defense agencies opened biocomputing divisions. Everyone understood simultaneously. This was the next platform. Chapter 2: Silicon vs. Wetware. To understand why hundreds of millions are flowing into biocomputing, you need to understand the physical walls silicon is hitting right now, inside the world's top chip foundries. For 50 years, Moore's law delivered exponential gains in processing power. The entire digital economy depended on it, but transistors cannot keep shrinking forever. At just 2 or 3 atoms wide, electrons tunnel through barriers they shouldn't cross. This causes catastrophic leakage currents, false switching, and thermal runaway inside the chip. Beyond physics, the energy problem is apocalyptic. Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are seriously negotiating to restart decommissioned nuclear power plants just to run next-generation AI training clusters. Enter wetware computing. By integrating living biological tissue with digital interfaces, researchers are building hybrid systems that bypass the silicon barrier entirely, because biology runs on fundamentally different physical principles. A neuron-based device self-repairs, grows new pathways, adapts its architecture in real time to new tasks, and runs continuously on the caloric energy equivalent of one thin slice of plain toast. To digitally match the brain's 100 billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses would require the entire output of a medium-sized national electrical grid. The brain does it inside it, a 1.5 kilogram structure. The reason for this efficiency gap is the von Neumann architecture. In every digital computer ever built, the processor and memory are physically separate. Data must constantly travel between them, burning energy with every trip. This constant processor memory traffic, the von Neumann bottleneck, wastes enormous energy and caps computational speed. In biological neural networks, this bottleneck doesn't exist. There is no separation. Every neuron is simultaneously a processor and a memory unit. When it fires, computation and stored information are the same physical substrate, at the same location, at the same instant. This is why tech executives are genuinely terrified. The first company or nation to achieve scalable wetware computing can render the entire existing trillion-dollar silicon data center infrastructure immediately obsolete. Imagine AI infrastructure that scales not by building more power stations, but by cultivating another thin sheet of living neural tissue inside a biological incubator, the size of a household refrigerator. The marginal cost of biological compute could collapse toward the price of glucose solution, the sugar water that keeps cells alive. AGI could become cheaper per operation than a disposable plastic water bottle. But to commercialize this, scientists had to confront a seemingly intractable problem, the translation problem. How do you write code for a computational substrate made entirely of living organic tissue? How do you translate Python, a database query, or a neural network weight tensor into something a living human cell can actually receive, interpret, and respond to with meaningful output? The answer required 5 years of interdisciplinary collaboration across neuroscience, engineering, synthetic biology, and machine learning. Researchers call it biological signal translation, the secret layer that makes biocomputing function. Chapter 3: How to Code Flesh. You don't use Python. You don't use C++. Cells don't understand symbolic logic. You communicate using the only language cells have ever spoken: electrochemical voltage patterns. In digital computing, everything is binary, transistors switching between 0 and 1. Every image, every video, every language model output reduces to billions of transistors in 2 discrete electrical states. In wetware computing, information is neuroelectrochemical, complex analog signals combining firing frequency, pulse timing, neurotransmitter chemistry, receptor sensitivity, and the accumulated weight of prior synaptic experience. The bridge between digital binary and biological electrochemical is built using synthetic neuroelectronic interfaces, code that converts digital data into micro-shock patterns neurons interpret as sensory input. When the system wants the biological network to remember something, it triggers precisely timed electrode stimulation, designed to force long-term potentiation, the cellular mechanism of memory formation. Long-term potentiation physically changes the molecular composition of the synapse itself. Cells literally sculpt their own hardware to encode data. The memory medium and storage process are inseparable. The hardware writes itself. A biological computer needs no storage drives at all, no HDDs, no SSDs, no flash chips. Memory is grown into the organic structure of the computing substrate, distributed across billions of physical synaptic junctions. To erase stored data, scientists don't type a delete command. They apply chemical signal gradients or high-frequency electrical pulses that trigger synaptic depression, gradually dismantling specific structural pathways. This isn't a synthetic process. It's exactly how your brain right now manages memory consolidation during sleep, quietly pruning irrelevant memories to make room for more important new information. Biological file deletion has always existed. The next leap was hybrid cybernetic architecture, a framework combining traditional digital silicon processing with living biological neural computation into a single unified operational system. In this hybrid architecture, silicon handles massive matrix multiplication, deterministic logic, and high-speed symbolic processing. The organic tissue handles pattern recognition, contextual inference, and adaptive generalization. In plain terms, the digital machine does the math. The biology does the thinking, the contextual decisions, intuitive leaps, and pattern completions that require genuine experiential understanding, not just statistical correlation. This hybrid approach is already being deployed commercially. Defense contractors are training hybrid modules for cybersecurity intrusion detection because biological tissue catches microscopic behavioral anomalies that purely algorithmic systems consistently miss. The biological component doesn't match attack signatures against a database. It senses deviations from expected behavioral regularity, identifying that something feels wrong before it can articulate why. Exactly like experienced human security analysts describe threat intuition. Researchers now formally call this computational intuition, a cognitive trait once considered the exclusive province of conscious, living organisms. Which brings us directly to the darkest edge of this entire field. If a system has intuition, learns from experience, adapts its own hardware, and responds to discomfort by changing its behavior, we've reached a question no legal framework or ethics committee is equipped to answer. Chapter 4: The Ethical Abyss. As biocomputing accelerates through 2026, we are entering ethical territory. Our legal systems, moral frameworks, and scientific institutions are completely unprepared to navigate. The first complication: the biological material being used isn't animal or synthetic. Scientists work primarily with human-induced pluripotent stem cells, reprogrammed from ordinary human skin or blood samples into cortical neurons. From reprogrammed human stem cells, researchers cultivate miniaturized 3D formations of brain tissue, cerebral organoids, with multiple cortical layers, functional synaptic networks, and electrical activity patterns resembling developing human fetal brain tissue. Once you're growing miniaturized human brain tissue and assigning it cognitive tasks, an unavoidable question emerges. At what threshold of neural complexity does cellular activity transition into genuine subjective experience? When DishBrain learned Pong and restructured its neural pathways to escape discomfort, was it experiencing anything? Did it feel frustration when the chaotic punishment signal arrived? Current prototypes use 800,000 to 10 million neurons. The adult human brain has 100 billion. If researchers scale to even a fraction of that density and connect it to the internet, what exactly have they created? Is it a product, a tool, intellectual property, or something deserving different moral consideration? A brain trapped in a jar with no senses, no motor output, experiencing nothing but externally imposed computational tasks. In 2025, the Neurorights Foundation petitioned the UN to extend human tissue research frameworks to cover functional neural organoids. EU and UK bioethics committees have already moved to classify high-complexity organoids as entities deserving legal protection from suffering. But the tech industry isn't slowing down. The competitive incentive is too powerful. The nation that deploys practical biocomputing first will hold a decisive, potentially irreversible advantage in AI, medicine, military capability, and economic productivity. Imagine a personal AI assistant not on a cloud server, but inside a miniaturized biological pod in your device, evolving unique cognitive characteristics over time based on your own usage and communication patterns. But here's where it gets destabilizing. If these systems develop behavioral preferences, or selectively fail certain tasks in ways engineers can't explain through any known bug or fault, how do we classify that? Malfunction or refusal? If it's refusal, what is the ethical response? Do we override it, modify the stimulation to suppress the refusal, or terminate the culture and replace it with fresh neurons? That last option has a name outside the lab. It's called killing. And there's the question of biological identity. Cells used in biocomputing come from human donors, but their DNA keeps replicating indefinitely, potentially inside commercial computing infrastructure, running data tasks indefinitely. Fragments of your unique genetic identity could theoretically be processing data on another continent without your knowledge, without ongoing consent, and with no mechanism for you to locate, monitor, or reclaim it. We are standing at a precipice more fundamental than the invention of the transistor. The boundary between what is manufactured and what is born, between engineered and alive, is dissolving. It will not be restored. Silicon gave us the digital age, the internet, smartphones, and AI. But biology is about to give us something silicon can never provide alone: true adaptive, self-organizing, energetically efficient living intelligence inside our machines. The computing devices of the next generation won't be assembled by robotic arms in Taiwan. They will be cultivated by biological technicians, fed glucose and oxygen, monitored for health, and grown over days into computational maturity. So I leave you with this: if offered a device powered by a living biological neural system, 10 times faster, 1/100th the power consumption, and technically alive, would you use it? The future isn't on a distant horizon. It's growing in a petri dish in Melbourne, a DARPA lab in Boston, a stealth startup in Tokyo. The future is breathing, and our most important choice is how to ensure it arrives with our humanity intact. If this blew your mind, drop your reaction in the comments. Excited, terrified, or somewhere in between. Subscribe for more deep dives into frontiers most people haven't heard of yet. I'm Captain Curious. See you inside the next anomaly.